The snow fell the way grief does quietly, without warning, until everything familiar disappeared beneath it. Helena Marsh pulled her daughter closer against her coat, the thin fabric doing almost nothing against the January wind that funneled between the buildings on Caldwell Street. The street lamp above them flickered, threw a pale orange smear across the snowbank, piling at the curb, and Helena pressed her back against the brick wall of a shuttered pharmacy and told herself, just breathe and think. She had $43 in her coat pocket. The coat belonged to the Salvation Army bin at the Greyhound terminal. She'd found it while Lily slept across two plastic seats, her small head cushioned on Elena's rolled-up sweater. The coat was men's size large and smelled faintly of cedar and someone else's life. Helena didn't care. She'd been wearing it for 2 days. Lily was 6 years old and had her father's eyes pale, wide-set, the color of a winter sky, and thankfully, none of his temperament. She stood with her mittened hands pressed to her stomach the way she always did when she was hungry, not complaining, just quietly acknowledging a fact the way children do when they have learned too early that complaints don't change anything. "Mommy." Lily's voice was small, almost swallowed by the wind. She turned her face upward and snow caught in her lashes. "If we eat today, will we starve tomorrow?" Helena's chest cracked open. She had been holding herself together for 48 hours. Through the bus terminal, through the single bag she'd packed in 7 minutes while Marcus slept off the whiskey on the living room floor, through the 3-hour ride to the city with Lily in her lap, pretending to be asleep so Helena could cry silently without frightening her. She had not cried at the bus terminal. She had not cried when the shelter intake worker told her there were no beds until Thursday. She had not cried when she realized she had no one in this city left to call. But her daughter's voice, that careful, too adult restraint that cracked her. "No, baby." It was not a lie, exactly. It was the only prayer she had left to offer. Across the street, 30 feet away in the amber cone of another street lamp, a man had stopped walking. Daniel Carter had not planned to be on Caldwell Street at 11:40 on a Wednesday night. He'd left the parking garage at the Meridian Tower 3 hours later than intended because the Tokyo call had run over and then Graham, his COO, and his oldest remaining friend had needed to talk, and Daniel had sat at his desk in the dark office and let Graham talk until Graham ran out of things to say, and then he'd said goodnight and taken the stairs down 16 floors because the elevator felt, lately, like a coffin. He walked most nights. Cold didn't particularly bother him anymore. He'd grown up in Vermont, in a house with single-pane windows and a father who believed hardship built character, and somewhere in the decade since his wife and son died on the I-90 interchange, Daniel had stopped feeling temperature the way normal people did. He felt other things, pressure, weight, the particular silence of a city after midnight, but cold registered somewhere distant. Academic. He had been 38 feet from the corner, about to turn north toward home, when he heard the child's voice. "If we eat today, will we starve tomorrow?" He stopped as though the words were a physical force. He looked across the street, saw the woman thin, drawn, a coat too large for her crouching now to wrap her arms around a small girl who was trying very hard not to cry. He saw the single bag propped against the brick wall. He saw the way the woman's hands gripped her daughter's shoulders. Fierce, protective, trembling. He saw the bruise. It was on the woman's jaw, partially concealed by her scarf, but the scarf had shifted in the wind, and the lamplight caught the edge of it. Purple-green, days old, the particular color of something done with intention. Daniel stood in the snow for 4 seconds. He thought about his son, Thomas, who would have been 8 years old this February, who had loved dinosaurs and grape juice, and who had, in the last photograph Daniel still kept on his desk, fallen asleep in a hospital waiting room, with his head tilted back and his mouth open in absolute, unguarded trust. He crossed the street. "Excuse me." He kept his voice low, non-threatening, stopped 6 feet back from the woman and her daughter. The woman's head snapped up immediately, alert, wary. The specific animal wariness of someone who had learned to read threat from a man's approach. He raised both hands slightly, palms out. "I'm not," he stopped. Reconsidered. What was he doing? What could he possibly say? The little girl was looking at him with her winter sky eyes. No fear, just curiosity. He said it anyway. "Come with me." Elena said no 3 times. The first time was reflexive, a hard, flat no, with her body already angling to shield Lily. The second time was when he offered his name, Daniel Carter, and she heard something in how he said it, a practiced evenness, the voice of someone accustomed to controlling rooms, and her skin went cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. The third time was when he gestured toward the far end of the block, where a black car idled at the curb, and she almost grabbed Lily and ran. What stopped her was Lily. Lily had been watching Daniel Carter with the focused, uncomplicated attention that children give to things they find genuinely interesting, and she said, in the particular tone she reserved for observations about the universe, "You have snow on your hat, and you're not a bad man." Elena looked at her daughter, then at the man. The bruise was throbbing. The $43 felt very small in her pocket. She said, the apartment was on the 19th floor of a building on Ashworth Avenue that Elena would later learn had been featured in an architectural magazine. She did not know this when she walked in. What she knew was, it was warm, and it was quiet, and it smelled of clean air and cedar, and something that had been cooking faintly, hours ago, and the walls were full of books. She stood in the entrance hall and held Lily's hand and waited for the catch. There was always a catch. Daniel Carter moved through the space with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had lived alone long enough that all his habits had settled into exact grooves. He turned on lights, not overhead lights, lamps, which made the room feel inhabited rather than surveilled. He took off his coat and hung it on a hook without ceremony, and when he turned back to them his face was not performing anything. Not warmth, not welcome, not the particular charged hospitality that Elena had learned to recognize as transaction. He said, "Are you allergic to anything?" She blinked. "What?" "Food allergies." "Either of you?" "No." "I know." He went to the kitchen. Elena stood in the living room and processed the space in the way she'd been trained to process spaces, exits, proximity, lines of sight. 3 exits she could identify. Wide windows, the front door she'd come through, a hallway leading further back. She was calculating whether she could reach the front door with Lily in the time it would take a man his size to cross the room when she registered that she was standing in front of a fireplace. A real one. Gas, she thought, but real. Blue and orange flame low behind glass, throwing actual warmth. Lily made a sound beside her. It was a very small sound, barely audible. It was the sound, Elena realized, of a child who had been cold for a very long time and had just stopped being cold. Lily walked toward the fireplace the way she walked toward things she loved, with absolute conviction, no hesitation, as if the world had always been preparing this exact moment for her, and sat down cross-legged on the hearthrug and held her mittened hands out to the glass. Elena sat on the edge of the nearest couch and did not let herself cry. From the kitchen came the sounds of someone who knew what they were doing. A pan, water, the opening and closing of a refrigerator. After a few minutes, Daniel appeared in the doorway. "I have soup," he said, "and bread." "I don't know why I bought it." He said the last sentence as though he was puzzled by himself. Elena watched him. "She'll eat anything," she said quietly. She hasn't. She stopped. She wasn't going to say she hasn't eaten since this morning to a stranger in his apartment. She wasn't going to perform her desperation. "The soup will be warm in 5 minutes," he said, and went back to the kitchen. From the hallway came the soft sound of a door, and a woman appeared, perhaps 60, in a robe, hair gray and short, glasses slightly askew. She assessed Elena, the bag, the child at the fireplace, all in one measuring glance. Then she looked toward the kitchen with an expression Helena couldn't read. "Mr. Carter," she called, just loudly enough to be heard. "Shall I make up the guest room?" "Please," came the answer from the kitchen. Both of them. The woman, Eleanor, she would turn out to be called. The housekeeper, who had worked for Daniel Carter for 11 years, looked back at Elena with an expression that was not quite warmth and not quite assessment. Something in between. Something that said, "I have seen this man for 11 years, and I am watching what he does next." "You'll want to eat," Eleanor said to Elena. "Come, sit down." Lily fell asleep at the kitchen table with her spoon still in her hand and a faint ring of tomato soup around her mouth. And she was sleeping with the total, trusting collapse of a child who has finally felt safe enough to stop holding on, and Daniel Carter stood in his kitchen doorway and looked at her and did not say anything for a long time. Elena said, "I can carry her." "I know," he said, and didn't move for another moment. Then he went to the sink and began washing the pot. Elena carried Lily to the guest room. It had 2 beds, Elena noticed immediately, arranged without forethought, but as if the apartment had always understood it might need them, and laid her daughter down and tucked the duvet around her small body and stood over her in the dark for a moment, listening to her breathe, before going back to the kitchen. Daniel was still at the sink. He'd made tea, there was a second mug on the counter, clearly for her, and she sat on a kitchen stool and wrapped her hands around it and thought, "I need to understand who this man is before morning." "What do you do?" she asked. He kept washing. "It's complicated." That's not an answer. He turned off the water, dried his hands on a dish towel in 3 careful, precise strokes, turned to face her. "I run a company," he said. "That's the simple version." "What kind of company?" He looked at her for a moment with dark eyes that were not unreadable, she decided, but expensive to read. Like they'd been made deliberately opaque through long practice. "Technology," he said. "Infrastructure." "It's not," he stopped. "It's not important right now. It's important to me," she said. And she held his gaze because she needed him to know she was not stupid and not grateful enough to be pliant. "You brought a stranger and her child to your home. I need to know who you are." Something shifted in his face. Respect, she thought. A recalibration. "Fair," he said. He told her. He ran Carter Technologies, which was not a household name, but operated the kind of digital infrastructure that household names depended on. Data routing. Security architecture. He said it plainly, without performance. He did not tell her what this meant in terms of revenue or scale, and she did not ask. She stored the name and decided to think about it later. His phone buzzed on the counter. She saw the word, "Urgent Graham." He looked at it, let it buzz, looked back at her. "You should answer that," she said. "I know," he said, and didn't answer it. They sat in the kitchen in silence for a moment, 2 strangers with their tea, while the snow continued outside the high windows. And in the guest room, Lily breathed and breathed and breathed in her unbroken sleep. There are things Elena Marsh had never told anyone. Not the intake worker at the shelter. Not the counselor at the women's outreach office who had given her pamphlets about safety planning. Not her sister Caroline in Raleigh, who had said 6 years ago, "Marcus seems a little controlling, Elena, are you sure?" To which Elena had said he's just protective, and believed it. Believed it for a full year before she understood the difference between protection and possession. She had married Marcus Marsh at 24, in a ceremony at a country club outside Columbus, in a dress that cost more than she'd made in 3 months of teaching elementary school. She'd been dazzled, she could admit it now, dazzled by the ease of him, by the way he moved through rooms like everything in them had been arranged for his use, by the absolute certainty with which he chose things, restaurants, bottles of wine, eventually a wife. The financial control had come first, gradual, sensible seeming. He managed the money because he was better with numbers, wasn't he? He was, and then the account she didn't have access to. the credit card taken from her purse. "I'll handle it. You know you overspend." The allowance, he called it that without irony, an allowance for groceries and Lily's things. The first time he hit her, Lily was 2 years old and asleep down the hall, and Marcus apologized for 40 minutes, and Elena stood in the bathroom with her hand over her mouth and catalogued the sound he'd made, and the sound she'd made, and the sound Lily had not made, still asleep, and she made her first calculation. If I stay calm, she stays asleep. She had been making that calculation for 4 years. She left on a Tuesday because that was when Marcus slept heaviest, the night after his late poker game, and she had been quietly accumulating what she needed for 3 months. Cash from the grocery change, Lily's birth certificate from the filing cabinet, 2 changes of clothes for each of them, her grandmother's earrings because they were small and worth something. She'd taken the bus to the city because it was the direction away from her sister, and Marcus knew Caroline's address. She had no plan beyond away. The shelter had no beds. The $43 had felt, for approximately 48 hours, like everything she owned. Daniel Carter's story was shorter and worse. His wife Rachel had been 31 when she died. His son Thomas had been 3. The accident on the I-90 interchange happened at 4:17 on a November afternoon, while Daniel was in a meeting in Seattle, presenting to a room of investors, closing a deal he'd spent 8 months building. He'd been in the meeting when his phone lit up with his mother-in-law's number. He'd let it go to voicemail. He'd been in the room when it happened. He did not talk about the guilt directly. He mentioned it once, briefly, sitting in his kitchen at midnight with a woman he'd met 2 hours ago. And then he closed the subject the way you close a door in a house where you no longer live, firmly, without drama, understanding that closing it doesn't stop the cold from coming under the gap. He'd been running the company harder since then. Not from ambition, the ambition had been real before. But ambition requires a future tense, and for several years Daniel Carter had found it difficult to locate his future tense. He ran the company the way some people run mechanically, as a substitution for something else, because motion is better than stillness when stillness is where the real problem lives. He had bought the cereal, the colored piece cereal, in November. He had carried it home in a bag and put it on the shelf and stood in front of it for a moment before moving on. He had not examined the impulse. He had not thrown the cereal away. 2 months later, a 6-year-old girl was eating it at his kitchen table. He did not mention any of this to Elena. He simply washed the pot, made the tea, and answered her questions as honestly as he could. But Elena Marsh, who had spent years learning to read what men didn't say, sat across the kitchen and listened to the spaces between his words, and began to understand the shape of what she was sitting in. The limousine was black, long, and absolutely incongruous against the snow-dusted sidewalk of Ashworth Avenue. Elena saw it from the guest room window at 7:43 in the morning, while Lily was still asleep beside her. She watched it idle, watched a man in a dark coat appear from the building's front entrance. Daniel, in a different suit than last night, moving with the particular efficiency of someone whose time has been other people's primary resource for years, and watched him stop on the step when another man met him on the sidewalk. The second man was younger, harried, holding a tablet and a coffee cup and talking rapidly. Daniel listened without expression, nodded once. Then his eyes moved up, seemingly by instinct, to the window where Elena stood. She didn't step back. He held her gaze for a second. Then he said something to the younger man, who immediately looked up at the same window with barely concealed astonishment and went back inside. 2 minutes later, a knock at the guest room door. "I have to go," Daniel said through the door. "Eleanor will be here. Breakfast is made. The apartment has a code. Eleanor has it. You don't need to leave." Elena opened the door. She was dressed, which seemed to surprise him. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully. "Daniel, the man outside called you something. A beat." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Mr. Carter, the board is waiting.'" She kept her voice even. "And then he said your car was ready. And from what I saw, That car costs more than my apartment back in Columbus." She paused. "So, I want to ask you again. Who are you?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, precisely, "I'm the CEO of Carter Technologies. The company has a market valuation of approximately $4 billion. I have a board meeting at 9, and I will be back by 6. He paused. "If you're still here." Behind Elena, from the bed, a small stirring. Lily sat up, hair wild, duvet around her shoulders, and looked at Daniel with those morning eyes, guileless, direct, and said, "Did you eat breakfast?" He blinked. He stopped. "That's not good," Lily said seriously. "My teacher says breakfast is the most important. She says your brain can't work without it." Something happened in Daniel Carter's face that Elena had not seen before. It wasn't performed. It arrived too quickly to be performed. And it left too quickly for her to name it before it was gone, replaced by the neutral mask. But she saw it. A brief, unguarded undoing. "There's eggs on the stove," he said to Lily. Quietly. "Already made. Will you eat some before you go?" He was quiet for 4 seconds. "Yes," he said. He ate standing at the counter, 3 forkfuls of scrambled egg, while Lily watched him from her stool with the focused approval of a school principal. Then he set down his fork, picked up his coat, and left. Elena stood in the kitchen and looked at the half-eaten plate of eggs. Lily looked at her. "He's not a bad man," she said, with the finality of a verdict. "I know, baby," Elena said. She wasn't sure yet what she was going to do with that information. The Carter Technologies boardroom occupied the entire south face of the 16th floor of Meridian Tower, and it was cold in the way that rooms built for power are cold. Climate-controlled, surface-perfect, designed to communicate that human warmth is a variable that has been optimized out. Daniel sat at the head of the table and moved through the quarterly projections with the systematic focus of someone for whom the work had long since become autonomous. The faces around the table, 12 people, most of whom he'd known for years, most of whom he could read in seconds, were attentive, deferential, occasionally challenging in the ways he permitted. Graham Ellison, his COO, watched him from the far end of the table with an expression Daniel ignored for the first 40 minutes of the meeting. At the break, Graham followed him to the window. "You look different today," Graham said. "I look exactly the same." "You look like you slept." Daniel said nothing. "Did you sleep?" Graham asked. "I had guests," Daniel said, and watched the city below the grid of cleared streets. The snow in the park, the ordinary choreography of 10 million people managing their ordinary days, and thought about a 6-year-old girl who had told him to eat his breakfast. Graham was quiet for a moment. Then, guests. A woman and her daughter. "I found them on Caldwell Street. They had nowhere to go." Another silence. Graham Ellison had been Daniel Carter's closest friend for 14 years. He had watched Daniel close down after the accident. He had watched Daniel build walls with the same precision and expertise he brought to infrastructure, architecture, clean lines, no gaps, load-bearing. He had stopped trying to breach those walls because Graham was, above all things, intelligent. He chose his words carefully. "Are they still there?" "I don't know," Daniel said. "She might leave. Do you want her to leave?" Daniel looked at the grid of the city. "At the park, with its snow. At the ordinary day, no," he said. Graham nodded once, slowly, and went back to the table. Meanwhile, on the 19th floor of a building on Ashworth Avenue, Elena Marsh was making a different kind of calculation. She sat at the kitchen table with the notebook she'd packed, the one she used for lists, for planning, for writing down the things she needed to do before she let herself panic and wrote down what she knew. She knew she had $43 and a men's coat from a donation bin. She knew Lily needed a stable school, a pediatrician appointment for the ear infection that had been brewing for 2 weeks, new winter boots because hers had worn through at the left heel. She knew that Marcus would eventually file for what his lawyers called custodial rights and what she called the continuation of control by legal means. She knew that she was sitting in a billionaire's apartment because his housekeeper made good coffee and his fireplace was real, and her daughter had declared him not a bad man. She also knew, and this was the knowledge she was least comfortable with, that Daniel Carter had not looked at her the way men who wanted something looked. He had looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they are trying not to make worse, the way someone looks at a thing they are afraid of wanting. She knew what it cost a person to want things again. She turned to a new page in the notebook and wrote, at the top, "What do I need to be okay?" She wrote for an hour. By the time Eleanor brought her more coffee, the list had 37 items on it, and she had begun to understand that okay was a more specific and achievable thing than she had thought when she was standing in the snow on Caldwell Street. She did not leave. It was a Thursday, 8 days after the night on Caldwell Street. Daniel was at the company. Lily was watching something on Eleanor's tablet in the kitchen. Elena was in the guest room, on the phone with a legal aid attorney named Patricia, who had a calm, precise voice and who had said, twice now, "You have more options than you think," when Eleanor appeared in the doorway. Eleanor's face had a quality Elena had come to read over 8 days. It was the face of a woman who had seen many things and classified most of them as manageable. That face, right now, was doing something different. It was carefully not alarmed, which was its own kind of alarm. "There's a man," Eleanor said, "at the front desk. He's asking for you by name." Elena's blood went cold. "What did he look like?" she said. "Tall. Very polished. He gave his name as Marcus Marsh," Elena said. Eleanor said nothing. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and breathed 3 breaths, slow, the way the counselor at the Women's Outreach office had taught her, and then she stood up. "Tell them not to send him up," she said, "and get Lily away from any window that faces the street." She called Daniel. He answered on the second ring, which she had not expected, and she heard in the background the compressed murmur of a professional environment, voices, the particular ambient sound of controlled spaces, and she said, "My husband is downstairs." 2 seconds of silence. "Stay inside," Daniel said. His voice had changed. She had heard him use this voice once before, on a call she'd accidentally overheard. Flat, stripped down, load-bearing. "Don't open the door. I'm leaving now." "You're in a meeting." "I'm leaving now," he said again. Marcus Marsh was standing in the lobby of the building on Ashworth Avenue when Daniel Carter arrived 40 minutes later. Marcus was, Elena had always thought, a man who had been designed by a process that valued the appearance of things. He was handsome in the specific way of men who understood that handsomeness was useful, and he carried his money like a second coat, invisible but warming. He stood in the lobby with his hands in the pockets of a cashmere overcoat and watched Daniel approach with the measured assessment of someone who was very good at measuring. Daniel said, "Mr. Marsh." "Mr. Carter." Marcus's voice was pleasant. Practiced. "I'm looking for my wife." "Your wife," Daniel said, "is not here." "I think she is." Marcus looked around the lobby with the particular entitlement of someone who expects the world to confirm his beliefs. "We have a daughter. Elena knows I'm worried. I just want to make sure they're safe." The concern in his voice was exceptional. Elena would have been devastated by it. Once, because it was precisely calibrated to devastate. "Your wife left," Daniel said, "with your daughter. Because of what you did to her." The pleasant expression on Marcus's face shifted very slightly, very briefly, and something colder came through, like substructure visible through damaged surface. "I don't know what she told you," Marcus said. "She didn't tell me anything," Daniel said. "I saw the bruise on her jaw when she was standing in a snowstorm on Caldwell Street with nowhere to go, and her daughter asking if they'd starve." Marcus said nothing. "You're going to hear from my attorneys in the morning," Daniel said. "And I'd strongly suggest you speak to yours, because the documentation of the injuries your wife sustained over 4 years is more complete than you know." Marcus looked at him. Behind the pleasantness, behind the entitlement, something moved the calculation of a man reassessing an opponent. "This isn't your business," Marcus said. You made it my business, Daniel said quietly. When you left them in the snow. He turned and walked back to the elevator. His hands, in his pockets, were shaking. He had not lost control of a negotiation in 12 years. He was not sure if what had just happened was losing control. He wasn't sure he cared. He rode the elevator to the 19th floor and knocked on the apartment door, and when Eleanor opened it, he said, "Kitchen," Eleanor said. He walked to the kitchen. Lily was at the table, building something from the craft supplies Eleanor had found in a closet, paper and glue, and the remains of a cardboard box with the focused creativity of a child who has been given space and materials and left to her own devices. She looked up when Daniel came in. She said, "You're back early." "I am," he said. "Did something happen?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he sat down at the table across from her, in the chair he had started to think of without naming it as his chair at this table. "Your dad was downstairs," he said. Lily's hands went still on the cardboard. "Did he come up?" she asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back to her paper construction, deliberately, with both hands, and she said, very quietly, "Good." Elena found him in the living room at 9 o'clock that night, sitting in the leather chair by the window with a glass of something amber and untouched on the table beside him, looking at the city. She sat on the couch across from him without speaking. After a while, he said, "I told him my lawyers would contact him in the morning." "Are your lawyers going to contact him in the morning?" "Yes." He paused. "Patricia Coleman, the legal aid attorney you've been talking to, she'll have access to whatever my team puts together. You don't need to manage this part." Elena said, "That's my marriage to manage." "I know," he said immediately. I don't want to take it from you. I want to be a resource you can use." "That's different." She looked at him. The city behind him was a grid of light and falling snow. She said, "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I have resources," he said, "and you need them, and it would be wrong not to use them." "That's the practical answer," she said. "I'm asking for the real one." He turned his head and looked at her. She held his gaze without moving. He said, "Because when I heard your daughter ask that question, 'Will we starve tomorrow?' I heard my son." Elena was very still. "He never got to ask it," Daniel said. "Thomas. He was 3 years old. He never got to be afraid of the future because he didn't get a future." He looked at his untouched glass. "And I walked past enough dark streets for the last 5 years and told myself there was nothing I could do." He paused. "I could do something on that street." Elena said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, "I'm sorry about your son." He nodded once. He didn't say thank you or it's okay or any of the normal things people said. He just accepted it, the way you accept something that is simply true. "I need to be able to do things myself," she said. "I need a job. I need my own account. I need Lily in a school with a real counselor. I need—" She stopped. "I need to not be someone you rescued. I need to be someone who is in the process of rescuing herself and you happen to open a door at the right moment." "That's exactly what happened," he said. "Then we understand each other," she said. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. "We understand each other," he said. It was 3 weeks later, and it was snowing again. Elena stood in the entrance hall of the apartment at 7 in the evening, with her coat and her bag, the same bag from Caldwell Street, though she'd replaced most of its contents, and she was conducting a negotiation with herself about what she was doing and why. She had a job offer, real one, a curriculum development position at an educational nonprofit 2 subway stops from Ashworth Avenue, reasonable salary, health insurance for her and Lily, starting the 1st of the month. Patricia Coleman had filed the initial custody documentation, and Marcus's first attorney letter had already arrived, and had been, according to Daniel's legal team, overreaching in ways that would not serve Marcus well. She had options, real ones. For the first time in 4 years, she had options. and that was why she had her coat on at 7 in the evening, because she had been here 3 weeks. And every morning, Lily had woken up and gone to find Daniel at his kitchen counter and told him something about her day. Something she'd read, something she'd built. And every morning Daniel had stopped what he was doing and given her his full attention. And Elena had stood in the doorway and watched it happen, and understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that she was no longer just grateful. Gratitude was safe. Gratitude had limits. Gratitude was transactional in a way that maintained the distance she needed to function. What she was feeling in the doorway every morning was not gratitude. She needed to leave because she had options. And because leaving now, before anything, was the thing she could do to protect herself from making a decision born of desperation rather than choice. She had the bag in her hand when Daniel came home. He stopped in the entrance hall. He took in the coat, the bag, her face, in exactly the order she'd expected. He was a fast reader. She'd learned that, and his expression did not perform alarm or hurt. It settled into the same careful, stripped-down register she recognized from serious conversations. "You're leaving," he said. "I have a job offer," she said. "I found a sublet in the Deering neighborhood. Lily's school can be moved to 3 blocks from the new place. Patricia says the custody filing is strong." She paused. "I have options, and I need to make choices from options. Not from needing something." He was quiet. "I understand," he said. "I know you do," she said. And then, because it was true and it cost her something to say it, that's part of the problem. He looked at her. In the quiet of the entrance hall, snow visible through the window behind him, pale and soft and persistent. He said, "Can I tell you one thing?" She said, "Yes." "I haven't." He stopped. Started again. "This apartment has been a waiting room for 5 years. Waiting for me to decide if I was going to be present in my own life again." He paused. "You and Lily are the first people I've been present for. Not because you needed something. Because you both of you make it easier to be here." She looked at him, the city behind him through the snow-dusted glass. "I'm not asking you to stay," he said. "I'm telling you that if you go and build your life, which I think you will, I think you'll do it very well. I'd like to be in it, however that looks, on your terms." He paused. "That's all." From the guest room, the sound of small feet on hardwood, and Lily appeared in the hallway, hair still damp from her bath, wearing the dinosaur pajamas she'd picked from the store Eleanor had taken her to, and she looked at Elena's coat and bag, and her face went very still. "Are we leaving?" she asked. Elena looked at her daughter. Lily said, in a small, careful voice. Daniel stepped into the hallway and crouched down to her level. He looked at her with the direct, unhurried attention he always gave her. He said, "With me?" "Always." Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Elena. Then she said, "Mommy, I think we should stay." Elena Marsh stood in the entrance hall of a stranger's apartment with her coat on and her bag in her hand and her daughter looking at her. And she thought about what it meant to choose something rather than need it. She set her bag down. She took off her coat. She hung it on the hook next to Daniel's, and the 2 coats touched at the sleeves. And she looked at them for a moment, her thin coat and his good one, her borrowed life and his empty one, neither of them what they'd been before, but both of them, possibly, the beginning of something after. "Dinner?" she said. "I'll make it," Daniel said. He was already moving toward the kitchen. His voice was even contained, but she heard something in it. The particular tone of a man who is trying very hard not to let something show because the showing of it still frightens him. She understood that. She understood it exactly. "I'll help," she said. 4 months later, the snow had been replaced by rain, and then by the particular pale green of a city spring shoots in the park, mud on sidewalks, the smell of wet earth and coffee, and the 1,000 ordinary composites of a city waking from cold. Elena Marsh started work at the non-profit on a Monday morning in April, in a building 3 floors above a dry cleaner, with a desk by a window and a team of 4 colleagues who were, she decided by Wednesday, fundamentally decent. She carried the notebook from Caldwell Street to her first day. The 37-item list had 32 items crossed off. Lily Marsh started at her new school on a Tuesday, and by Friday had opinions about 3 different friends and her new classroom's reading corner and the lunch menu, which she delivered to Daniel over dinner with the systematic thoroughness of a quality control inspector. Daniel listened to all of it. He asked follow-up questions. Lily was satisfied with his attention and moved on to a detailed account of something she'd read about migratory birds, and Daniel said, "I didn't know that about the Arctic tern," with what Elena had come to understand was genuine curiosity, not performance. Patricia Coleman's custody filing moved through the legal process with the slow, decisive weight of a well-prepared case. Marcus's attorneys revised their position twice. By the 3rd week of April, Marcus had agreed, through his lawyers, to a mediated arrangement that gave Elena primary custody and removed the financial mechanisms he'd used as control for years. Patricia called it a good outcome. Elena called it a floor she could stand on. She found the sublet in the Deering neighborhood. She moved into it in early May, she and Lily, with their bags and the craft supplies Eleanor had pressed on them, and a card from Eleanor that said, in small, precise handwriting, "You are braver than you think, both of you." She lived in the sublet. Daniel lived on Ashworth Avenue. There was a subway stop exactly between them, and they used it frequently, trading evenings and weekends with the particular naturalness of people who have already learned the texture of each other's daily life. He came for dinner on Wednesdays. She and Lily came on Sundays. Lily had a drawer at Ashworth Avenue and her own mug and a specific claim on the hearthrug by the fireplace. It was not a rescue story. Elena had decided that and said it aloud to Daniel in the Deering kitchen on a Wednesday in June. While they were doing dishes she washed, he dried, a division of labor they'd arrived at without discussion. "This is not a rescue story," she said. He dried a mug, looked at her. "What is it?" "It's a door-opening story," she said. "You opened a door. I walked through it. I did the rest." He considered this. "I did make the soup." "You made the soup," she conceded. "The soup was very good." He set the mug down. He looked at her, that reading look, the one she'd learned to read in return, the one that meant he was deciding whether to say something. He said, "I have something for you." He went to the jacket he'd hung on the back of the chair, and from the inside pocket he took a small box. Not velvet, not hinged, a plain wooden box, dark oak, very small. The kind of thing a craftsman makes rather than a jeweler. He held it out. She looked at it. Then, at him. "I'm not good at speeches," he said. "I made that clear from the beginning. You made that very clear from the beginning. So I'm going to say this plainly." He held her gaze. "I want to keep being in your life. Formally, specifically, with intent. If you want that." She took the box, opened it. Inside, a single ring, plain silver, a very small inset stone, nothing overwhelming. It was exactly right. It was exactly the ring of someone who knew her. "The terms are still mine," she said. "Always," he said. She looked at the ring, then at the man across from her, the quiet man who washed dishes and ate breakfast when Lily told him to, and had stood in an entrance hall and said with me, "Always," and had meant it the way people only mean things when they know what loss costs. "Yes," she said. They married in December, on a Saturday, when the snow had returned soft and specific, the snow of beginnings rather than endings, falling on a city that had seen both and could tell the difference. The ceremony was at a small space rented above a bookstore in the Ashworth neighborhood, 40 people. Good light, a string quartet that played one piece too long but no one mentioned it. Eleanor cried without apologizing. Graham Ellison made a toast that was funny, and then unexpectedly sincere, and then funny again, which was, everyone agreed, the right order. Lily was the flower girl. She had requested this role herself, stated it as a matter of logistics rather than sentimentality, and she performed it with enormous gravity. Walking the aisle with both hands gripping the basket, distributing petals at exact, measured intervals, and when she reached the front, she turned to check her work and gave a single nod of satisfaction. Daniel saw her do it, and his face did the thing Elena had learned to wait for, that brief, unguarded arrival of something that came too fast for the neutral mask to catch it. That thing that was not quite grief and not quite joy, but the particular feeling of both at once, of a life that had been empty being quietly, specifically, irreversibly filled. He reached down and took Lily's hand. She let him hold it. The snow fell on Ashworth Avenue and on Caldwell Street and on the park with its bare trees and on the ordinary grid of a city doing its ordinary work of holding a million lives together. And inside a bookstore, at the end of an aisle of white petals, a woman who had stood in the cold with $43 and a men's coat said, "I do" to a man who had crossed a street in the snow because he heard a child ask a question he couldn't walk away from. Later that night, after the 40 people had gone, and the bookstore was quiet, and Lily was asleep in her flower girl dress on a chair in the corner, her basket in her lap, Elena stood at the window and watched the snow, and Daniel stood beside her. After a while, Lily stirred in the chair. She said, in a sleep-soft voice, to no one and everyone, "Mommy, we won't starve tomorrow, right?" Elena looked at the snow, at the city, at the man beside her. She said, "No, sweetheart." She said, "We're home now."